Hello readers, welcome to this channel. Please subscribe and leave a like for us. It means the world to us. Also, share this video with your loved ones and turn on post notifications so you don't miss future videos from us. Thank you. As you do so, sit back and relax as we dive into this story. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, sealed with crimson wax and stamped with a crest Isabella didn't recognize. She turned it over in her hands, her fingers trembling slightly as she sat in the cramped parlor of her aunt's townhouse in London. "Open it, for heaven's sake," her Aunt Margaret said, peering over her embroidery with sharp eyes. "Standing there like a statue won't tell you what's inside." Isabella broke the seal and unfolded the thick paper. The handwriting was elegant, almost too perfect, as if the writer had practiced each letter 100 times before committing it to the page. "Miss Isabella Clarke, I write to you on a matter of utmost urgency and delicacy. I am in need of a service that requires discretion, intelligence, and a woman of good character who finds herself in circumstances that might make such an arrangement beneficial to both parties. I require someone to pose as my wife for 1 week during the visit of my elder brother, the Marquis of Holloway. The reasons are personal and will be explained should you agree to meet. In exchange, I offer £1,000 and assistance in securing a position as a governess in a respectable household thereafter. If this proposition interests you, come to Barrington House tomorrow at 2 o'clock. Ask for Duke Roderick Barrington. Yours in confidence, R. Barrington." Isabella read it twice, then a third time. £1,000. That was more money than she'd see in 5 years of working as a seamstress, which was her current occupation, and a poor one at that. Since her father's death 2 years ago, she and her mother had been living on her aunt's charity, a situation that grew more uncomfortable with each passing month. "Well?" Aunt Margaret demanded. "It's an unusual offer," Isabella said slowly. She handed the letter to her aunt, watching the older woman's face shift from curiosity to shock to something that looked almost like calculation. "A duke," her aunt breathed. "Duke Barrington. I've heard of him. They say he's cold as winter frost and twice as cutting, never married, never courted anyone seriously. There are rumors, of course." She waved her hand vaguely. "There are always rumors about powerful men." "Should I go?" Isabella asked. Her aunt looked at her for a long moment. "Child, you're 23 years old with no prospects, no dowry, and no future beyond sewing until your fingers bleed. If this duke is offering you money and a way forward, you'd be a fool not to at least hear him out." The words stung because they were true. Isabella had once imagined a different life, a small home of her own, perhaps a kind husband, children, a garden. Simple things. But poverty had a way of crushing dreams into dust. The next afternoon, Isabella stood before Barrington House, her best dress pressed and her hair pinned neatly beneath her bonnet. The house was enormous, all white stone and tall windows that seemed to watch her like eyes. A butler answered her knock, his face expressionless as he led her through halls decorated with paintings of stern-faced ancestors and furniture that probably cost more than everything she'd ever owned combined. Duke Roderick Barrington was standing by a window in his study when she entered. He turned, and Isabella's breath caught despite herself. He was tall, probably in his early 30s, with dark hair and eyes the color of storm clouds. His face was handsome in a sharp, angular way that made him look like he'd been carved from marble rather than born from flesh. But it was his expression that struck her most, utterly unreadable, as if he'd trained himself to show nothing at all. "Miss Clarke," he said, his voice deep and controlled. "Thank you for coming. Please sit." She sat in the chair he indicated, folding her hands in her lap to keep them from shaking. "I'll be direct," the Duke said, remaining standing. "My brother is visiting from the country next week. He's been pressuring me for years to marry, to produce an heir, to fulfill what he sees as my duty to the family line. I have no interest in marriage." I find the institution constraining and the romantic sentiments associated with it to be largely fabricated nonsense." Isabella blinked. "Then why?" "Because he's threatening to have me declared unfit to manage the estate," Roderick interrupted, his jaw tightening. "He claims a man who refuses to marry and carry on the family line is shirking his responsibilities. If I can show him I'm happily married, he'll cease his interference. After his visit, you and I will quietly separate. I'll tell him you've gone to visit family. By the time he realizes the truth, it will be too late for him to act." "That's deceptive," Isabella said carefully. "Yes," Roderick agreed without hesitation. "It is, but it harms no one and benefits us both. You'll have money to start a new life, and I'll have my freedom. 1 week, Miss Clarke. 7 days of pretending to be content in my company. Can you do that?" Isabella thought of her mother's cough that wouldn't go away, of the medicine they couldn't afford. She thought of her aunt's increasingly pointed comments about being a burden. She thought of the tiny room she shared with her mother and the future that looked like nothing but more of the same. "What would I have to do?" she asked. "Attend meals with my brother and me, act as hostess for one dinner party, accompany me on walks around the grounds, essentially appear to be a devoted wife who has made me moderately happy." He said the last part with such distaste that Isabella almost laughed. "You really don't believe in love, do you?" she said before she could stop herself. His eyes met hers, and for a moment something flickered there. Not anger exactly, but something old and tired. "I believe in contracts, Miss Clarke. Clear terms, clear expectations, clear endings. Love is none of those things. It's a pretty story people tell themselves to make sense of impulses they don't understand." "That's sad," Isabella said quietly. "That's practical," he corrected. "Do we have an agreement?" She should have said no. Every instinct told her this was wrong, that pretending to be someone's wife, even for a week, would lead to complications she couldn't foresee. But when she opened her mouth, what came out was, "Yes, we have an agreement." Roderick nodded once, as if he'd expected nothing less. "Good. You'll move into the East Wing tomorrow. My housekeeper, Mrs. Winters, will help you settle in and explain the household routine. I've arranged for a dressmaker to provide you with appropriate clothing. As far as the staff is concerned, you are my wife. We married quietly a month ago. Understood?" "Understood," Isabella echoed, though she understood nothing at all. "One more thing," Roderick said as she stood to leave. "My brother is perceptive. He'll look for cracks in our story. You'll need to be convincing, Miss Clarke. Can you pretend to care for a man you don't know?" Isabella met his cold gaze and felt something stir in her chest, not affection, not yet, but something like challenge. "Can you pretend to care for anyone at all, Your Grace?" His eyebrow lifted slightly, the first real reaction she'd seen from him. "Touché, Miss Clarke. I suppose we'll find out together." As the butler showed her out, Isabella couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just agreed to something far more complicated than a simple week of pretending. Duke Roderick Barrington might think he had everything calculated, every possibility accounted for. But Isabella had learned something important in her years of poverty and loss. Life had a way of destroying even the most careful plans. And sometimes, just sometimes, that destruction led to something better than what came before. The east wing of Barrington House was more luxurious than anywhere Isabella had ever lived. Her room had a 4-poster bed with curtains of deep blue silk, a writing desk by the window, and a wardrobe that the dressmaker had already filled with gowns in soft colors, pale pink, cream, lavender, sage green. When Mrs. Winters showed her around, Isabella had to remind herself to breathe normally, to act like she belonged in a place where even the door handles were made of polished brass. "The Duke takes breakfast at 7, Mrs. Winters explained, a kind woman in her 50s with graying hair tucked neatly under her cap. "Lunch at noon, dinner at 7 in the evening. He's a man of routine, our Duke. Likes things orderly and predictable." "What's he like?" Isabella asked, then immediately regretted the question. "I mean, as an employer. What should I—" "You're his wife, dear," Mrs. Winters said gently, though her eyes held understanding. "You needn't explain yourself to me. But I'll tell you this, the Duke is fair, demanding certainly, he expects excellence. But he's never cruel, never raises his voice. Just distant, like there's a wall between him and everyone else." Isabella thought of his words about love being fabricated nonsense. "Has he always been that way?" Mrs. Winters was quiet for a moment, smoothing her apron. "He lost his parents when he was 17. Carriage accident. His father died instantly. His mother lingered for 3 days. The Duke, he wasn't a duke then, just Lord Roderick. He sat by her bedside the entire time. Didn't eat, barely slept. And when she finally passed, it was like something in him closed up tight. He inherited the title, took over the estate, and never spoke of them again. That was 15 years ago." "That's terrible," Isabella whispered. "Yes," Mrs. Winters agreed, "but grief affects people differently. Some open up, some shut down. Our Duke shut down. Now let me show you the library. The Duke's brother arrives tomorrow, so tonight you'll have dinner alone with His Grace. Consider it practice." That evening, Isabella dressed in one of the new gowns, a simple but elegant cream dress with delicate embroidery at the sleeves. She'd never worn anything so fine. When she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. The dining room was intimidating in its formality. A long mahogany table stretched before her, set with china so delicate it looked like it might shatter if she breathed on it wrong. Roderick was already seated at the head of the table, reading correspondence with a frown. "Good evening," Isabella said, her voice smaller than she'd intended. He looked up, and something shifted in his expression. Surprise, maybe, though it vanished so quickly she might have imagined it. "Miss Clarke, please, sit." "Shouldn't you call me Isabella?" she asked, taking the seat to his right. "If I'm meant to be your wife?" "Isabella." "Then," he set aside his papers, "and you may call me Roderick, though not in front of the staff. They'd find it too familiar." A servant brought the first course, a delicate soup that smelled like herbs and cream. Isabella picked up the correct spoon only because she'd been watching which one Roderick used. "You're nervous," he observed. "I've never pretended to be a duchess before," she said, attempting humor. "I'm bound to be nervous." "You needn't be. My brother Edward isn't particularly observant about social graces. He cares more about whether you seem to make me happy than whether you know which fork to use." "And how do I make you seem happy?" Isabella asked. "You don't strike me as someone who smiles often." "I don't," Roderick agreed. "But contentment can be shown in other ways. Relaxed posture, engaged conversation. The occasional almost smile. You've thought this through carefully." "I think everything through carefully, Isabella. It's how I've managed the estate successfully for 15 years without any help from my interfering brother." There was bitterness in his voice that surprised her. "You don't get along with him?" Roderick was quiet for a moment, his fingers tracing the stem of his wine-glass. "Edward is 7 years older than me. When our parents died, he believed he should have inherited everything, but the title passed to me as the second son, according to our father's will. Edward has never forgiven that. He sees my refusal to marry as proof that I'm unfit to carry on the family legacy." "And are you?" Isabella asked softly. "Unfit, I mean?" His eyes met hers, sharp and assessing. "That's a bold question. You hired me to pretend to be your wife for a week. I think bold questions are allowed." Something that might have been amusement flickered across his face. "Fair enough. No, I'm not unfit. The estate prospers. The tenants are well cared for. I've expanded our investments and modernized our farming practices. By every measurable standard, I'm an excellent duke. But Edward believes that without a wife and children, none of it matters, that I'm failing some deeper duty." "Maybe he wants you to be happy," Isabella suggested. Roderick's laugh was cold. "Edward wants me to conform. There's a difference. Happiness is an unstable emotion, Isabella. It comes and goes based on circumstances beyond our control. I prefer satisfaction, the knowledge that I've managed my responsibilities well and hurt no one in the process." "That sounds lonely," she said before she could stop herself. His expression hardened. "Loneliness is also an emotion, one I've learned to ignore. Now tell me about yourself. If we're to convince Edward we're married, I need to know basic facts about my supposed wife." So Isabella told him. About her father, a clerk who died suddenly of a heart condition. About her mother, who'd never been strong and had grown weaker in her grief. About the small house they'd lost because they couldn't pay the rent, the move to her aunt's home, the work as a seamstress that barely kept them fed. "You've known real hardship," Roderick said when she finished. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Isabella agreed, "but I've also known real love. My parents adored each other. Even when we had nothing, we had that. I used to think it was foolish, the way my mother would save pennies to buy my father's favorite tobacco, or how he'd walk an hour out of his way to pick wildflowers for her. But after he died, I understood. Those small acts of love were what made everything else bearable." "And when he was gone?" Roderick asked quietly. "My mother lost her bearings. She still hasn't found them. She exists, but she doesn't really live. That's what love can do when it's taken away." "Exactly my point," Roderick said, leaning back in his chair. "Your mother gave her happiness over to another person. When that person was gone, she had nothing left." "I've never understood why people consider that arrangement desirable." "Because the alternative is never feeling anything at all," Isabella countered, surprised by the passion in her own voice. "My mother had 25 years of joy with my father. Yes, she's suffering now, but she wouldn't trade those years for anything. That's what love is, thinking someone is worth the risk of loss." Roderick stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "You're more of a romantic than I expected." "And you're more damaged than you want to admit," Isabella said, then immediately regretted her boldness. "I'm sorry. That was inappropriate." But Roderick didn't look angry. If anything, he looked tired. "Perhaps. But damage, as you call it, is simply learning from experience. I learned that attachment leads to pain, so I don't attach." "It's logical." "It's safe," Isabella corrected gently. "That's not the same as logical." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken things. Finally, Roderick stood. "It's getting late. I suggest you rest. Tomorrow will be demanding. My brother arrives at 10, and you'll need to be prepared." "Prepared for what?" Isabella asked, standing as well. "For him to test you," Roderick said. "Edward will try to find cracks in our story. He'll ask personal questions, look for signs we're not truly married. You'll need to stay calm and follow my lead." "I can do that," Isabella said, with more confidence than she felt. As she turned to leave, Roderick spoke again. "Isabella?" She looked back. "The dress suits you," he said quietly. "You look appropriate for a duchess." It was probably meant as a simple observation, but something in his tone made it feel like more. Isabella felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Thank you." Back in her room, she lay awake for a long time, staring at the canopy above her bed. 1 day down, 6 more to go. She'd thought this would be simple: play a part, collect her money, move on. But already she could feel the situation growing more complicated. Duke Roderick Barrington wasn't just cold and calculating, he was wounded. And despite knowing better, despite understanding that this was just an arrangement, Isabella felt something dangerous stirring in her chest. Not love, she wasn't foolish enough to call it that. But maybe curiosity, maybe the desire to understand what had frozen a man's heart so thoroughly that he'd convinced himself feeling nothing was better than risking pain. And perhaps, just perhaps, the smallest hope that she might be wrong about him being entirely frozen after all. Edward Barrington arrived exactly at 10 the next morning, stepping out of an elegant carriage with the bearing of a man accustomed to commanding attention. He was older than Roderick, with threads of silver in his dark hair and lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled more often than his younger brother. But his expression as he surveyed Barrington House held something critical, almost disapproving. Isabella stood beside Roderick on the front steps, her hand resting lightly on his arm, as Mrs. Winters had instructed. "A wife touches her husband casually," the housekeeper had said that morning while helping Isabella dress. "Nothing too obvious, but small gestures. It shows comfort with one another." Now, with Edward approaching, Isabella was acutely aware of the warmth of Roderick's arm through his jacket sleeve, the subtle tension in his posture that probably no one else could detect. "Edward," Roderick said, his voice perfectly controlled. "Welcome." "Roderick," Edward's gaze shifted to Isabella, and she felt herself being evaluated like a horse at market. "And this must be the mysterious bride I've heard nothing about until your letter last week." "Isabella," Roderick said, and Isabella didn't miss the slight tightening of his jaw. "My wife, Isabella, this is my brother, the Marquis of Holloway." "It's a pleasure to meet you, my lord," Isabella said, curtsying as Mrs. Winters had taught her that morning, not too deep, as she was a duchess, and therefore his equal in rank, but respectful. "The pleasure is mine," Edward said, though his eyes remained sharp. "How extraordinary that Roderick managed to marry without any of us knowing. Tell me, how did you two meet?" Isabella's mind went blank. They hadn't discussed this. Roderick had said they married quietly a month ago, but not where or how or why. "At a charity event," Roderick said smoothly, surprising her. "Isabella was organizing donations for a children's hospital. I attended out of obligation and found myself impressed by her dedication." "How romantic," Edward said dryly. "And you courted for how long?" 3 months, Isabella said, finding her voice. The number felt right, long enough to be respectable, short enough to explain the quiet wedding. "It was quick, I know, but when you find the right person, waiting seems pointless." She felt Roderick glance at her, but kept her eyes on Edward. "Indeed," Edward murmured. "Well, shall we go inside? I'm eager to learn more about the woman who accomplished what numerous debutantes and their ambitious mothers could not," capturing my brother's attention. The day was exhausting. Edward asked questions constantly about Isabella's family, her education, her interests, how she was adjusting to being a duchess. She answered as honestly as she could while dancing around the fact that she'd lived in poverty until a week ago. Roderick helped, steering conversations away from dangerous topics, but the effort of maintaining the pretense left Isabella drained. That evening, after Edward retired to his rooms, Isabella found Roderick in his study, staring into the fireplace with a glass of whiskey in his hand. "That was harder than I expected," she admitted, sinking into a chair without waiting for invitation. "Edward is suspicious by nature," Roderick said, "but you handled yourself well. The charity event detail was good thinking. You came up with that, not me. And you expanded on it naturally. That's the key, taking the truth and bending it slightly. You genuinely care about helping people. I could see it when you spoke about the children's hospital, even though we'd invented it on the spot." Isabella studied him. "You're good at reading people." "I have to be. Running an estate means managing tenants, business partners, staff, understanding what people want, what motivates them. It's essential." "Is that how you see everyone? As puzzles to solve?" Roderick finally looked at her. "Is that so wrong?" "It's sad," Isabella said, echoing her words from their first meeting. "People aren't puzzles, Roderick. We're messy and complicated, and we don't always make sense. Exactly why keeping distance is wise. Or cowardly." The word hung in the air between them. Isabella expected anger, but instead Roderick smiled. Actually smiled, though it was small and tinged with something bitter. "You're brave to say that to a duke who's paying you," he observed. "You hired me to pretend to be your wife, not to be afraid of you," Isabella countered. "Besides, what are you going to do? Fire me? We have 6 more days of this arrangement. You need me as much as I need your money." True enough. He took a sip of whiskey, then surprised her by holding out the glass. "Would you like some? You look like you could use it." Isabella took the glass, the weight of it unfamiliar in her hand. She sipped carefully, the liquid burning down her throat and warming her chest. "That's awful." "It's an acquired taste." "Like you?" The words slipped out before she could stop them. Roderick's eyebrow lifted. "Am I growing on you, Isabella?" "No," she said quickly, too quickly. "I just meant you're not as terrible as you pretend to be. Disappointing, I'm sure. Actually, it's more interesting. The cold Duke routine would be boring if that was all there was to you. But there are cracks." "Cracks?" He sounded genuinely curious. "In your ice," Isabella clarified. "Like when you helped me with Edward's questions. You didn't have to do that. You could have let me flounder, but you protected me. And when Mrs. Winters talks about the tenants, how you personally visit families when there's illness or trouble, that's not something an unfeeling person does." "That's management," Roderick said, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. "Healthy, content tenants are more productive." "You can tell yourself that if it helps you sleep at night," Isabella said gently. "But I think you care more than you want to admit. Caring just scares you." Roderick set down his glass with deliberate precision. "You're very presumptuous for someone I've known 3 days. You opened the door by hiring me to live in your house and pretend to be your wife. That's not exactly a normal arrangement. It invites presumption." He stared at her for a long moment, and Isabella wondered if she'd finally pushed too far. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed, a real laugh, short but genuine. "You're either very brave or very foolish," he said. "Can't I be both?" "Apparently, yes." He stood, moving to pour himself more whiskey. "For what it's worth, you're not what I expected either." "What did you expect?" "Someone more mercenary. Someone who would take the money and ask no questions, make no observations, leave no impression. Instead, I got you. Someone who argues with me about emotions and calls me cowardly to my face." "Should I apologize?" "No," Roderick said, surprising her again. "It's refreshing. Most people are too intimidated or too eager to please. You're neither." "I have nothing to lose," Isabella pointed out. "That's freeing." "Perhaps that's the real difference between us," Roderick mused. "You've already lost everything and survived. I've spent my life ensuring I never have to experience loss at all." Isabella stood, moving closer to where he stood by the fireplace. "But you have experienced it. Your parents—" "Are dead?" he interrupted flatly. "And discussing them won't change that." "No," Isabella agreed softly. "But pretending you never loved them won't protect you from having loved them. The pain already happened, Roderick. Refusing to feel it now doesn't erase it. It just means you're still letting it control you." She saw something flicker across his face, pain, anger, maybe recognition. For a moment she thought he might actually talk to her, really talk about the loss that had shaped him. Instead, he turned away. "It's late. We should both rest. Tomorrow Edward wants to walk the grounds. You'll need to accompany us and look appropriately content with your marriage." The dismissal was clear. Isabella felt the distance he was creating, the walls going back up. Part of her wanted to push harder, to crack through his defenses. But another part, the wiser part, knew that would only make him retreat further. "Good night, Roderick," she said quietly. "Good night, Isabella." As she left his study, Isabella realized something that both thrilled and terrified her. She wasn't pretending anymore. Somewhere between the forced conversations and careful observations, she'd started to genuinely care what happened to the cold, damaged Duke who'd hired her to play a part, and she had no idea what she was supposed to do about that. The next 3 days fell into a strange rhythm. Edward watched them constantly, looking for flaws in their performance. Roderick and Isabella learned to move around each other like dancers who'd practiced together for years, anticipating, adjusting, filling in gaps. Isabella would pour Roderick's tea without asking how he took it. He would hand her a shawl before she mentioned being cold. Small things, but Edward noticed them all. "You seem genuinely comfortable together," Edward remarked on the 4th day as the 3 of them walked through the estate gardens. "I confess, Roderick, I expected this to be some elaborate scheme, but Isabella looks at you like she actually cares what you think." Isabella felt Roderick's arm tense beneath her hand. "Why would it be a scheme?" he asked coolly. "Because you've spent 15 years declaring marriage a waste of time and love a fiction," Edward said bluntly. "Then suddenly you've married in secret? It seemed suspicious." "People change," Isabella said before Roderick could respond. Maybe he just needed to meet the right person. "And that person is you?" Edward's gaze was direct, not unkind, but searching. "Forgive me, Isabella, but you don't seem like Roderick's usual type." "I wasn't aware my brother had a type," Roderick said sharply. "He doesn't," Edward agreed. "That's my point. You've never shown interest in anyone. Now here's Isabella. Lovely, certainly, but hardly from the social circles you typically navigate. No offense intended, my dear." "None taken," Isabella said, though her cheeks burned. "You're right. I'm not from Roderick's world, but maybe that's exactly why we work." "How so?" Isabella glanced at Roderick, saw the warning in his eyes, but pushed forward anyway. "Because I don't expect him to be anything other than who he is. I'm not trying to fix him or change him or turn him into some romantic ideal. I just see him, the real him, and he sees me the same way. Maybe that's what love actually is, being known completely and accepted anyway." The silence that followed felt heavy. Edward was studying them both with new interest. Roderick's expression had gone carefully blank, but Isabella could feel the tension radiating from him. "That's very wise," Edward said finally, "and rather beautiful, if true." "It's true," Isabella said firmly, meaning it even though the situation was a lie. That evening, after another exhausting dinner where Edward continued his subtle interrogation, Isabella escaped to the library. She'd discovered it on her 2nd day, a vast room filled with floor-to-ceiling shelves, comfortable chairs, and windows that overlooked the gardens. It had become her refuge. She was reading when Roderick found her, still dressed in his dinner clothes, but with his jacket removed and his collar loosened. "There you are," he said. "I thought you'd retired." "Couldn't sleep," Isabella admitted. "Your brother exhausts me. The constant questioning, the analyzing." "He's leaving tomorrow," Roderick said, settling into the chair across from her. "2 more days after that, and you'll be free of this arrangement." 2 days. Isabella's heart sank at the thought, which was ridiculous. This was always temporary. She'd always known that. "What you said today," Roderick continued, his voice careful, "about being seen and accepted. Did you mean that?" Isabella set down her book. "I meant that's what love should be." "I wasn't claiming we. I mean, obviously we're not—" "I know what you meant," he interrupted. "I'm asking if you believe it, that being fully known by someone is desirable. Don't you?" "I think being fully known is terrifying," Roderick said quietly. "It means someone sees all your weaknesses, all your failures, all the parts of yourself you've spent years trying to hide. That's not love. That's vulnerability without protection." "But what if the person who sees all that doesn't leave?" Isabella asked. "What if they stay anyway?" "No one stays," Roderick said, and there was such deep certainty in his voice that Isabella's heart ached. "Everyone leaves eventually, through death or disappointment or simply changing their mind. Counting on someone to stay is foolish." Your parents didn't choose to leave, Isabella said gently. No, but they left, and I was 17, Isabella, old enough to inherit a title and an estate and enormous responsibility, but young enough to still need them desperately. Do you know what it's like to sit beside your mother's deathbed and know that within hours you'll be completely alone? No, Isabella admitted. But I know what it's like to watch someone die slowly. My father's heart simply stopped one day, but my mother, she's been dying by inches ever since. She's breathing, eating, existing. But the woman she was died with him. Roderick leaned forward, elbows on his knees. That's exactly what I'm trying to avoid. Your mother gave her whole self to your father. When he died, she had nothing left. How is that noble? How is that worth celebrating? Because she had 25 years of being completely alive first, Isabella said. 25 years of joy and companionship and being part of something bigger than herself. Yes, she's suffering now, but she'd suffer anyway. We all die eventually. At least she knows what it was to be truly loved. And you think that's worth it? The pain? I think the alternative is worse. Never letting anyone close, never risking anything, never feeling. That's not safety, Roderick. That's just a different kind of death. You're not protecting yourself, you're punishing yourself. For what? He asked, his voice rough. For surviving, Isabella said softly. For being the one who lived when your parents died. For being 17 and powerless to save them. For still being here when they're not. The words hung in the air like a confession. Roderick stared at her, his face pale, his eyes reflecting something raw and painful. How do you see that? He whispered. Because I've felt it too, Isabella admitted. When my father died, part of me felt guilty that I was still breathing when he wasn't, that I got to keep living when he deserved it so much more. I'm not as important as him. I haven't done as much good. Why did I survive when he didn't? And how did you move past it? I haven't, not completely. But I try to honor him by living fully, by being brave enough to risk pain because that's what he would have wanted. He loved my mother enough to risk losing her. He loved me enough to risk leaving me. That courage, that willingness to say someone is worth the risk, that's his legacy. I won't dishonor it by being too afraid to love anyone myself. Roderick stood abruptly, moving to the window. His shoulders were tense, his hands clenched at his sides. You make it sound simple. It's not simple at all, Isabella said, rising and moving toward him. It's terrifying. Every time I start to care about someone, I remember what losing my father did to my mother, and I want to run. But then I remember what they had, and I think, if I never risk that, I'll regret it forever. I don't regret my choices, Roderick said, but he didn't sound convinced. Don't you? You're 32 years old, Roderick. You live in this enormous house with servants and wealth and power. You're objectively successful. But are you happy? Happiness is an unstable emotion, I know. You've said that. But what about satisfaction? The kind that comes from genuine connection, not just duty fulfilled. Do you have that? He turned to face her, and Isabella saw something in his eyes she'd never seen before. Uncertainty. I have peace. Peace or emptiness? Maybe they're the same thing. They're not, Isabella said firmly. Peace is contentment despite challenges. Emptiness is the absence of feeling anything at all. Which one do you really have? Roderick didn't answer. Instead, he did something that shocked them both. He reached out and took her hand. His fingers were warm, slightly trembling, and Isabella felt the touch like electricity through her entire body. I don't know anymore, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Since you've been here, I don't know anything anymore. You've disturbed my peace, Isabella. You've made me question everything I built my life around. I'm sorry, she whispered back. Don't be. His thumb brushed across her knuckles, such a small gesture, but it felt monumental. Maybe I needed to be disturbed. Maybe 15 years of protecting myself has just been 15 years of hiding. They stood there in the lamplight, hands joined, neither quite brave enough to acknowledge what was happening between them. This wasn't pretending. This wasn't the arrangement. This was something real and frightening, and neither of them knew what to do with it. Finally, Roderick released her hand and stepped back. "It's late. We should both rest." "Roderick." "Please," he said, and there was something almost desperate in his tone. "Not tonight. I can't. Not tonight." Isabella nodded, understanding that he'd revealed more than he'd intended and now needed distance to rebuild his walls. "Good night, then." As she left the library, she pressed her hand to her chest where her heart was racing. She'd come here for money, for a way forward, for practical reasons. But somewhere along the way, she'd started to care for the broken Duke who didn't believe in love. And she had no idea if that would save them both or destroy them. Edward left the next morning, apparently satisfied that Roderick's marriage was genuine. As his carriage pulled away, Isabella stood beside Roderick on the front steps, waving goodbye with a smile that felt painted on. "Well," she said once Edward disappeared down the drive, "we did it. He believed us." "Yes," Roderick agreed, his voice flat. "You were very convincing." The words felt like a door closing. Isabella dropped her hand from his arm, suddenly aware of the space between them. "When should I leave? Tomorrow, as planned?" That was the arrangement. "Right. The arrangement?" She forced brightness into her tone. "I should start packing then, Mrs. Winters said she'd have my payment ready by morning." Isabella, but she was already walking away, unable to bear whatever practical, rational thing he was about to say. She'd let herself forget this was temporary. She'd let herself imagine impossible things. Now reality was crashing back, and it hurt more than she'd expected. In her room, she began folding the beautiful dresses back into the wardrobe. She wouldn't take them. They belonged to the pretend Duchess, not to her. Tomorrow she'd put on her old dress, take her money, and return to being Isabella Clarke, poor, practical, alone. A knock on her door made her turn. Mrs. Winters stood there, her face concerned. "His Grace would like to see you in his study." "Tell him I'm busy packing." "Isabella," Mrs. Winters said gently, "I've worked for the Barringtons for 23 years. I've watched that boy grow into a man and close himself off from everyone. These past few days, I've seen something change. Don't run from it." "It was just pretend," Isabella said, but her voice cracked. "Was it?" Mrs. Winters asked. "For either of you?" Isabella found Roderick in his study, standing by the fireplace as he so often did. He looked tired, older somehow, and when he turned to face her, she saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. "Don't leave tomorrow," he said. "What?" "Don't leave. Stay. Not as part of the arrangement. Just stay." Isabella's heart pounded. "Why?" "Because you were right. About everything. I have been hiding. I have been punishing myself. And I've been alone for 15 years because I was too afraid to let anyone see me. But you see me, Isabella. Somehow you see right through all my carefully constructed walls, and you see who I actually am. And you're still standing here." "Roderick?" "I'm not good at this," he continued, the words tumbling out faster now. "I don't know how to be vulnerable or open or any of the things you talked about, but I want to try, with you, if you'll let me." "This is happening very fast," Isabella said, trying to organize her racing thoughts. "A week ago we were strangers. Yesterday we were pretending. Today you're asking me to stay? I know it's illogical. I know it goes against everything I've said about love being unstable and impractical. But I can't let you walk away without telling you that this past week has meant something to me. You mean something to me." Isabella moved closer to him, searching his face. What exactly are you asking? I'm asking you to give me a chance, to let me learn how to do this, to be with someone, to trust someone, to maybe even love someone. I can't promise I'll be good at it. I can't promise I won't be difficult or frustrating or occasionally impossible. But I promise I'll try. And if you fail, if you decide this was a mistake and you want your peaceful, empty life back, then I fail, Roderick said simply. But at least I'll have tried. At least I'll know. I've spent 15 years being certain that isolation was safer than connection. You've made me uncertain, Isabella, and maybe uncertainty is exactly what I need. Isabella felt tears threatening. I'm scared. So am I. What if we hurt each other? We probably will, Roderick admitted. People do, even when they care. But what if we don't? What if this actually works? Isabella thought of her parents, of their 25 years together. She thought of her mother's grief and her father's courage. She thought of everything she'd said to Roderick about risking pain for the chance at joy. Okay, she whispered. Okay? I'll stay. We'll try. But Roderick, I need you to promise me something. Anything. Promise me you won't pretend. No more walls, no more distance, no more hiding behind logic and control. If we're doing this, we're doing it honestly, even when it's scary, especially when it's scary. Roderick nodded slowly. That's going to be hard for me. I know, but I'll help you. And you'll help me when I'm scared too. That's how this works. We face things together. He reached for her hand again, holding it like something precious. I don't deserve you. Probably not, Isabella agreed with a small smile. But you're stuck with me anyway. Isabella? Yes? I think I might love you. I'm not certain. I've never felt this before, so I have no comparison. But I think this might be what it feels like. Tears spilled down Isabella's cheeks. I think I might love you too, which is absurd because a week ago I thought you were the coldest person I'd ever met. I was, Roderick said. But you thawed me. Somehow, impossible as it seems, you made me feel again. He pulled her closer, and Isabella went willingly, resting her head against his chest and hearing the rapid beating of his heart. His arms came around her, hesitant at first, then stronger. They stood there in the firelight, two damaged people who'd found each other by accident and decided to be brave enough to stay. What do we tell Edward? Isabella asked after a long moment. The truth, that I hired you to pretend to be my wife, but somewhere along the way it stopped being pretend. He'll either understand or he won't. And if he doesn't, then that's his choice. I'm done living my life to please my brother. I'm done living it to please anyone except myself. And right now, what pleases me most is the idea of building a life with you. Isabella lifted her head to look at him. I don't know how to be a duchess. I don't know how to be a husband. We'll learn together. The society ladies will talk. Let them. I've never cared about society. I'm still poor, Roderick. I don't have a dowry or connections or anything to bring to this marriage except myself. Yourself is everything I want, he said simply. Then, with more vulnerability than she'd ever heard from him, is it enough? Am I enough for you? Isabella rose on her toes and kissed him, soft and brief but full of promise. You're enough. More than enough. You're everything I didn't know I was looking for. When they parted, Roderick was smiling. Actually smiling, open and genuine and almost boyish. I have no idea what I'm doing. Neither do I, but we'll figure it out. Together? Together, Isabella confirmed. Chop-tum. 3 months later, Isabella stood in the gardens of Barrington House, watching her students from the local school practice their reading under Mrs. Winters's supervision. Roderick had insisted on funding a proper school for the village children, and Isabella had thrown herself into the project with joy. She heard footsteps behind her and smiled as Roderick's arms wrapped around her waist. "How was your meeting?" she asked. "Productive. The new irrigation system should be installed by summer." He rested his chin on her shoulder. "Edward wrote. He wants to visit next month." "What did you tell him?" "That he's welcome any time, that we have nothing to hide." He paused. "I also told him thank you." "For what?" "For pushing me toward marriage. If he hadn't threatened to have me declared unfit, I never would have placed that advertisement. I never would have found you." Isabella turned in his arms. "Do you ever regret it, giving up your peaceful, controlled life?" "Every day," Roderick said, then smiled at her startled expression. "I regret that I wasted 15 years when I could have been feeling this instead. But the chaos, the emotion, the uncertainty of loving you? Never. Not for a moment." "I love you too," Isabella said, "even when you're difficult." "Especially when I'm difficult," Roderick corrected. "You'd be bored otherwise." She laughed, and he kissed her, and in the distance she heard one of the children giggle at seeing the Duke and Duchess being affectionate. A week had changed everything. 1 week of pretending had led to a lifetime of truth. Isabella had come to Barrington House desperate and hopeless, expecting nothing but money and a way forward. Instead, she'd found home. She'd found purpose. And most impossibly of all, she'd found love in the heart of a man who'd convinced himself he had no heart left to give. Sometimes the best things in life came from the most unexpected places. Sometimes taking a risk on something impossible led to everything you'd ever wanted. And sometimes, just sometimes, pretending to be someone's wife for 1 week really did change everything.